aircraft first flew in 1962, taking off from Groom Lake Air Base, an area. Designated the SR-71 Blackbird. My friend Chuck, an SR-71 pilot, related to me an in-flight incident he had in the 1970s. He was returning from a reconnaissance.
Come on. That Fouche, I heard of him.
And designated the A-12. The Mach 3 Plus aircraft first flew in 1962, taking off from Groom Lake Air Base in Area 51. Later, once the Air Force took over the operation, it was designated the SR-71 Blackbird. My friend Chuck, an SR-71 pilot, related to me an in-flight incident he had in the 1970s. He was returning from a reconnaissance flight, was at an altitude of 74,000 feet and a speed of Mach 3 times the speed of sound. He noticed something flickering in his peripheral vision. Hovering over his left wingtip was a ball of dense plasma-like light. When he stared at it for more than a few seconds, it hurt his eyes. Chuck tried to use his UHF, VHF, and HF communication sets to no avail. There was nothing but static. Repeatedly glancing at the ball of light, he watched in amazement as it moved effortlessly about his aircraft. At one point, the light positioned itself a few feet in front of the spiked cone of the air intake inlet. The enormous amount of air rushing into the engines should have sucked in and shredded almost anything in its path. But the light orb was mysteriously unaffected.
Magnetic field.
The light, he noted, acted in a curious manner. If something inanimate could act in a curious manner, or act in any manner at all. It moved from time to time to other parts of the aircraft, staying until its approach to Beale Air Force Base, California. It was inside of the air base when the plasma ball finally pulled away from the aircraft in a wide arc at ever-increasing speeds. Of course, after reading his incident report, his operations commander told him never to speak of this incident. When Chuck related the story to me, he was absolutely convinced this plasma ball was controlled by some form of intelligence. I have over 24 stories from pilots of similar incidents with UFOs and plasma balls.
I can tell you what it is. TR-TV.
Have you ever heard stories about missing memory?
Missing time.
Sal worked a program for 2 years in a top-secret research facility in California. At the end of the program, he started having flu-like symptoms. And after several days of worsening symptoms, went to his company doctor.
Vertigo.
His company prescribed some medication and sent him home for 2 days. On the third day, he woke up and couldn't remember where he worked or who he worked for. He called his brother. His brother, in a panic, called up the company. The company informed him that his job had been terminated because his contract had run out. Sal was the SR-71 pilot I spoke of earlier. To this day, and I can't say to this day, I heard from Sal in 2 years, the only thing he could ever reconstruct was from his pay records, letter of offer, and his personal notes, engineering notes, to convince him he actually had worked there. The company in question was involved in developing the TR-3B gravity disruption device called the magnetic field disruptor, which is the circular accelerator part of the TR-3B, which I'll go into more detail in a minute. Any of you ever heard of the super strong foil-like material at Roswell? I'm sure most of you heard something about. Another friend who worked for General Dynamics in Fort Worth described a program in which he worked at a plasma accelerator in the mid-60s, researching gravity warping techniques. He is a physicist by education and trade. This was his first top secret program. He described a foil-like material much like that discovered after Roswell crash. He described the foil as 12 layers of material less than 10,000ths of an inch thick. It was as flexible as a plastic trash bag, but virtually indestructible to piercing, burning, or cutting, which you've probably all heard before. Here's what you haven't heard. In order to cut the material used for the project, the material was supercooled, a large electrical charge was applied to polarize the molecular structure, and a laser cutter was applied in order to cut this material. Large ribbons of this material were used to reinforce the accelerator, which contained the mercury-based plasma that they started researching in 1965. The plasma was cooled to superconductive temperatures, rotated at 45,000 revolutions per minute, and pressurized at 150,000 atmospheres. This would be considered state-of-the-art technology even today, some 30 years after he worked the project. 33, okay. Yeah. He related that the project achieved its objective. Instruments and test objects placed within the center of the accelerator showed a 50% loss in weight attributed to the reduction in the gravitational field. You'll hear a little bit more about this technology when I address the TR-3B and the magnetic field disruptor. From 1973 through 1976, I was home base at Edwards Air Force Base. It is near Lancaster, California, and even nearer the San Andreas Fault. Edwards has a long history of secret technology and experimental aircraft. It's a shame that's not clear. That's a B-2 stealth aircraft. It's a beautiful picture. The YB-49 was flown in 1948 at Edwards Air Force Base, which looks a lot like the B-2 stealth bomber. The XB-70 was first flown in 1964 and looks a lot like the new top secret SR-75 the Air Force says doesn't exist. Edwards is the home of the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School and is responsible for flight operational test and evaluation of the Air Force's newest aircraft. It hosts a number of tenant organizations, including NASA and a Jet Propulsion Laboratory facility. I worked the F-111 Swing Wing Bomber, the F-15 Air Superiority Fighter, the F-16 Fighter, the A-10 Close Air Support Attack Aircraft, and the B-1 Stealth Bomber. I was involved with these and other classified development programs when they were just a gleam in some pilot trainees' eyes. One night, a longtime friend of mine and I were standing on top of the Fairchild A-10 hangar at Edwards Air Force Base. It was 2 a.m. and a perfectly clear night with millions of stars visible to the naked eye. This was a very common night at Edwards. I noticed a group of stars where the guy seemed to be shifting in color. And at the time, I could name quite a few constellations. I'd just taken an astrology course, and I definitely knew what the Big Dipper was. I made a C in that course, I think, or a B. So I pointed out to my friend that the three stars near the Big Dipper in triangular formation were not supposed to be there. We watched as the strobing stars shifted in color from a bright blue to a reddish yellow. After a period of about 20 minutes, we could tell that the objects weren't stars because they were getting larger. This was somewhat unnerving. It was further unnerving when the space in between the stars started blocking out the stars in the background. We decided it probably was a top secret Air Force vehicle of some type. Still, we weren't sure. At the time, I didn't believe in UFOs. And that's the honest truth. The vehicle had gone from half the size of the Big Dipper to twice its size in a half hour. It had moved from the west to the east towards Edwards Air Force Base. About that time, we could make out the silhouette or outline of the triangle